20 kids got shot, and there's like 10 that are at least dead in the library.
Today, a special Fox 11 News In-Depth, Columbine 20 years later. It was a story that rocked the country on a scale America had never witnessed before. Mass murder in a high school, perpetrated by 2 of the students. Now, 2 decades and many shootings later, what, if anything, has changed? Are we safer? And are we doing enough to protect our kids? This special Fox 11 News In-Depth, Columbine 20 years later, starts right now. Hello, everyone. I'm Hal Eisner. April 20th, 1999, Littleton, Colorado. A nightmare that still hasn't ended. Just this week, Columbine and several other schools were closed after receiving what police call violent threats from a Florida woman allegedly obsessed with the Columbine shooting. She was later found dead outside Littleton. Danger at our schools may be common now, but 20 years ago it seemed unthinkable. I was in Columbine covering the story after 2 heavily armed students changed everything.
I just started screaming and crying and telling them not to shoot me.
The first detailed accounts came from terrified students who managed to escape with their lives, like this teen who heaved his wounded body out a second-story window into the arms of officers below.
They all told us to get under the desk, and we all got under the desk, and then they just started coming in the library and opening fire and shooting out bombs.
More than 2 hours after the shooting began, the SWAT team was finally able to launch a rescue mission. Students ran as bullets ricocheted off lockers. Others found their mark. More than 20 were wounded and had to lay and wait for transportation to nearby hospitals. For others, help came too late. When it was over, Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris murdered 12 students and 1 teacher, then killed themselves. It was, at the time, the worst high school massacre in U.S. history. No longer. Since then, many other shootings have gripped the nation, including Sandy Hook, where 20 children and 6 adults were killed, and Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, where 17 people died. After Parkland, it seemed like a line had been crossed. No more is the chant at this protest. At rallies across the country, students called for change.
To Congress, you are directly responsible for every community that is lost due to gun violence, and you have the power to change this. And if you don't, then we will change you.
President Trump held a listening session at the White House. One father whose daughter was murdered at Parkland said, enough is enough.
How many schools, how many children have to get shot? It stops here.
President Trump promised to take on the NRA.
Some of you people are petrified of the NRA. They have great power over you people. They have less power over me.
But later he said the solution is more guns, not fewer, saying teachers armed with weapons could confront a shooter, like the man in Texas who used his rifle to stop Devin Kelly, who had just killed 26 people at a church.
If he didn't have a gun, instead of having 26 dead, he would have had hundreds more dead.
Since then, President Trump has changed his focus to legislation that would strengthen background checks, which he says is close to rolling out. Steve Zipperman is the chief of the LA Unified School District Police Department. He joins us now. And Chief, I know you remember that day. We've known each other a long time, 20 years ago. In many ways, it seems like a long time ago. In many ways, it seems like it was not that long ago.
Right. And I think we can all agree these are certain anniversaries. You hope you don't ever have to have anniversaries to talk about tragic incidents. I think that since Columbine, unfortunately, while the conversation always gets going after a school shooting, as you saw in some of these clips, I remember that day vividly, asking, why, how, and what can we do, not only from the law enforcement perspective, but perspective from a school approach, perspective from a society approach, perspective from a parental approach.
You were with LAPD at the time.
Yes, at that time I was with LAPD, that's correct.
And you've been with the district for?
So I'm in my 9th year now as the chief of the LA School
So at that time, as a police officer, you're thinking?
Well, again, I think when you see that, oftentimes in the law enforcement world, we look at that incident and we ask, what can we do to respond quicker? What can we do to minimize any loss of life when an event unfolds? However, we all know many of these incidents end in 5 to 6 minutes for the most part. And so I think that as we take a look at, here we are 20 years later, we're 20 years later and 17 mass school shootings have occurred since then, 14 before Columbine. Now, it goes way back. I mean, we started taking a look at some, I say we, as historical perspective, even into 1927 when you had the Bath, Michigan incident. And of course the Texas incident, the clock tower incident at Texas University.
And I remember that because I was there at the time.
Yes, and so when you look at these incidents, and by the way, because these incidents are still rare, a 1 in a million chance of a student losing their life as a result of a shooter, it doesn't make any parent feel any more comfortable. The bottom line is, what do we do as a society? What do we do in the law enforcement world? What do we do in public education, in the mental health component? Because it's a multidisciplinary approach to this.
Yeah, all those are very important tiers. I want to continue with that conversation. And with regard to the University of Texas shootout, just to remind everybody, there was a man named Charles Whitman who got up on the tower at the University of Texas, used that as a perch, and shot at people down on campus.
Yes.
And at the time I was in Dallas, I think I remember that so well. It was so horrible. After the Parkland shooting last year, President Trump took up the issue of protecting students from attacks. His solution was to arm teachers. Listen.
People that are adept with weaponry and with guns, they teach. I mean, I don't want to have 100 guards standing with rifles all over the school. You do a concealed carry permit.
So he talks about a concealed carry permit for teachers. And when you first heard that, what was your reaction to that idea? And since then, have you changed your thinking on that at all?
Well, when I first heard it, obviously, it was an idea that I don't agree with for a lot of reasons, and it's not changed since. I suppose there are situations in which that may be something that is probably necessary. And when I say that, perhaps in a school district in a very rural area where maybe the closest law enforcement agency is a half hour away and they don't have a school resource officer. Maybe in a situation like that, where 1 or 2 individuals who have gone through proper training and continue to go through proper training, and they are certified and they're identified by the school staff as being the ones that would possibly be the ones to engage if, God forbid, this happened, then maybe yes. But in a situation in most public schools, in a large urban school district where law enforcement is usually minutes, sometimes seconds away, or a school resource officer is on the site, there are a lot more concerns about teachers being armed and things that can go wrong than there would be that, if an incident did occur. There's just too many things to look at that can go wrong. First of all, teachers are paid to teach.
Right.
And you probably would get an answer from most teachers that they don't agree with that concept.
And we have.
Yeah, sure.
We've heard that.
Yeah.
But yet, that is an idea out there. I want to get your report card, as long as we're talking about schools, on the grade you might give yourself and your department on dealing with the second largest school district in the United States, the LAUSD. I'd like to do that when we come back.
Sure.
Still ahead on this special Fox 11 News in Depth, more from Chief Zipperman. Plus, we'll hear from the mother of one of the Columbine shooters and talk to a psychiatrist about the role of mental illness on school shootings. All of that when we come back after the break. Whenever there's a school shooting, one of the first questions we ask is, why did they do it? After Columbine, one person asking that question was Sue Klebold. Her son Dylan was one of the 2 shooters. She turned her grief and her feelings of guilt into a call for mental health awareness, especially for teens.
2 years before he died, he wrote on a piece of paper in a notebook that he was cutting himself. He said that he was in agony and wanted to get a gun so he could end his life. I didn't know about any of this until months after his death. When I talk about his death as a suicide, I'm not trying to downplay the viciousness he showed at the end of his life. I'm trying to understand how his suicidal thinking led to murder.
What a complicated conversation. Sue Klebold talked about her son at a TED Med conference in Palm Springs. That was in 2016. Joining the discussion now is Dr. Carol Lieberman, a forensic psychiatrist and author who has testified in criminal cases involving mental illness, and Chief Zipperman from the LA School District Police back with us right now. I want to pick up real quick from you. The report card you would give yourself for dealing with security in the second largest district. You have over 600 schools. What is that, 700 square miles?
Yes.
It's almost like a city you're dealing with.
Oh, absolutely. It's the second largest school district in the United States as far as student population and everything else.
And what do you tell parents about what you're doing?
I think, first of all, you asked, what kind of a grade would I give myself? I think, honestly, probably a B, because you give yourself an A, there's not a lot of room for improvement, and we always have room for improvement. Now, we've come a long way, and this is a team effort. We talked earlier about the importance of the multidisciplinary approach to these issues, and we've learned a lot since Columbine. Obviously, in looking at the tape and listening to Ms. Klebold, and you take a look at how this happened, why did it happen. Today, obviously, our response efforts are a lot quicker. Law enforcement has trained with other law enforcement agencies for the response component. We've taught teachers and administrators on how to better respond to these incidents. We have our safe school plans that are ongoing and continuously reviewed year by year. But more importantly, we have come a long way with regard to understanding the mental health component of this issue, because that is a huge factor. So we need to take a look at the beginnings of somebody being on a trajectory to violence, or how do we recognize the signs, and when we do recognize that, what resources do we have to address this so it does not reach a level of this tragedy.
Yeah, Dr. Lieberman, he brings up some good points there about how we have to try to curb this up before it ever gets to a point of being a problem. How can we possibly do that when we don't know what we're dealing with in many of these cases?
Well, there really are signs early on. A child who is a loner, a child who the teacher sees being bullied, a child who isn't doing well in school and maybe because of things that are going on at home. I mean, the problem is that it's good that we've improved in some of the security issues, but in terms of the psychological issues, it hasn't improved at all, and in fact, it's gotten worse.
Well, in many ways, is that because of social media? Would you say?
I think without doubt, I think all of us can agree. The social media aspect, social media platforms that our young people are exposed to today, the violent games that are being played on, that they spend their time with. And so I think, that in and of itself invites a lot of this type of activity.
And there's cyberbullying, and there's all sort of things like that.
Well, yes, when Columbine happened, they did a poll about what people thought was the reason why this occurred and what are the things that contribute to this. And media violence, particularly video games, was number 3 on the list. And I have been doing, over my career, I've been doing a lot against media violence, especially video games, violent video games. And the students were all there saying we should have no guns, stop the guns. How many of those students have violent video games at home? I mean, it's not the guns. It's all that they're putting into their mind. And Mrs. Klebold, I don't mean to, she's suffered enough, but she said something that is still the case today with so many parents, and that is she didn't find out that he was suicidal until she read, his diary and so on. She found out later. That's the problem. Parents are not keeping up their pulse.
Or students are doing a good job of hiding their feelings.
Well, yes.
And they will do that, right? They will do that.
Yes, but if you have a parent, it really is the responsibility of the parent. If you have a parent who shows you that you want to know about these things, then the student will open up. And they were bullied. There were not only video games like Doom, but there were movies like The Basketball Diaries and Natural Born Killers, which has caused so many copycats. That one movie. And you know, there were problems. They didn't feel that girls liked them. There were all these different social teenage issues that if the students got help from their parents, from professionals, if they needed professional help, these things wouldn't happen.
Hang with me for a second. Still ahead, we'll be talking to a teacher and get their point of view on safety in our schools, and more from those terrible days in Columbine. I was there as students tried to make sense of what had happened. Will you ever be able to get over this?
I think it'll always come back in our minds.
The Columbine tragedy hit Littleton, Colorado like a tsunami. I was there 20 years ago in 1999, and I talked with students who were grieving the loss of their classmates and parents who were wondering whether it was safe for their kids to return to school. There were tears by Rachel Scott's car. Scott drove to school on Tuesday, but never drove home. There were tears as friends remembered the faces of those who died.
Just really tell your friends how much you love them, and so that, because you don't know when the next time you're going to see them is going to be.
14-year-old Steve Dredden will never see his good friend Isaiah Scholes again. Dredden ran for his life. Scholes lost his inside the school.
He was just always smiling, and he tried to make a joke out of everything.
You're worried?
Yes, definitely.
John DePuine is very worried. As Chatfield High and other area schools reopened this morning with added security, he worried about his own daughter's safety.
I'm worried because copycats.
Will you ever be able to get over this?
I think it'll always come back in our minds.
You know, and that conversation always comes back in my mind. I remember him so well. I remember like it was yesterday. Abo Morgan joining us now. He's a social studies instructor at Teach Academy of Technologies. That's a charter school in the LA Unified District. Is that right?
Yes, it's a charter school, public charter, and we have about 400 to 500 kids.
South Side, right?
South LA, Western, near the 105 freeway.
Got it.
Yeah.
You've heard the conversation up to this point. Well, why don't you just kind of jump in here with some of what you've heard, some of your reaction to it?
Well, it reminds me of the importance of school culture and just nurturing and having the discipline and nurture like at a balance, because it's something that we practice at our school is that we collect phones. We don't allow phones to be on campus during the class instruction time, because it tends to lead to social media interactions that are not always positive, and so that whatever starts outside of the school tends to make it culminates inside of the school, and we try to prevent that.
What do you think when you hear about things like a Columbine, a Sandy Hook, the Florida Parkland incident? What do you think about it? Does it kind of resonate in your mind that, oh, this could happen here?
Well, the closest thing I think we have to that in terms of our experience is that we are in a very gang culture, culturalized, if that's a word, place.
You can make it a word,
right?
Here. It's okay.
Just for today. And so we understand that those are possibilities that things will flare up, and so we really tend to work inside and outside and make relationships with those who are prevalent in the neighborhood, who understand the issues, who have communication lines that maybe we don't have, and we reach out. And so we do all this groundwork and we research our students to make sure that we know as much as we can about them before they come.
Do you talk to your students about this stuff when it happens?
Oh, yeah.
And so what do you tell them? What do they say to you?
Well, the students are, well, it's kind of hard for them to like connect with Columbine, so to speak. But like when it comes to schools and gangs and things of that nature, they have a stronger sense of awareness, and they are troubled by what happens outside of the school and inside, because some students really come to learn. Most of our students really come to learn, and when they have these outside influences that are negative, they tend to clam up and feel like they can't do what they're there for.
Doctor, I guess that probably resonates with you a little bit. They clam up.
Yes, absolutely. You know, we can see that things really haven't changed very much, at least psychologically, by looking at the recent one-year-old Parkland. You know, Nicholas Cruz was suffering from the same kinds of things that Eric and Dylan were suffering from. Nihilism, you know, feeling that there's no point to living, that the world is bad, people are bad. He came from a broken home. Now, Eric and Dylan didn't come from broken homes, but clearly we saw that the parents weren't paying attention to them, you know, what was going on in their mind. Playing the violent media and so on, and being bullied and being an outcast. You know, Nicholas Cruz, they recognized from a very young age that he was having problems, and they gave him some extra attention. But well, the mental health system fell down with Nicholas Cruz, and of course it fell down with Eric and Dylan too, although Eric was supposedly seeing a psychiatrist and a psychologist. You know, why they didn't intervene,
Right.
that's a whole other issue.
You know, but it strikes me that the overarching thought here is mental health. So on those two words alone, let me just get a quick comment from all of you. Chief, mental health, that's kind of that's the top rung of this, isn't it?
Well, I think we can all agree that it's one of the major components. In fact, even in LA Unified does a tremendous job with their student mental health unit, and even as school police officers, you know, we are getting introduced and having that discussion on the issues of our, you know, your adverse childhood experiences of the young people growing up, and how we are able to address things through trauma-informed practices. So when you start having those kind of conversations in a school police world, along with your mental health practitioners, and understanding the nuances of what causes some of these kids to get on the trajectory, and not only that, what do you do to help address it? Early intervention. You're right, but you know, when you look at what happened in Parkland, there was a breakdown in the mental health system, and so we've learned, at least LA Unified, and we have some incredible systems in place now that we're able to take certain mental health cases, and we work with our mental health practitioners in the district and our threat assessments, and we follow up on those.
So let me end it there, because really time is escaping us. But I think the bottom line is that we've got still a problem on our hands, that it's not solved. It's still a challenge for society. We'll be back with an update on my podcast after the break. And finally, if you haven't already checked out my podcast, What the How, on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you subscribe to these things, I hope you will. And if you haven't caught it yet, this is important. Listen to episodes 47, 48, and 49, how to prepare, survive, and recover from a major earthquake when it happens. That's it for this week. Thanks for joining us on this 20th anniversary of the Columbine Massacre.